People saying Viva file lawsuits. If you're saying that, it's nice that you're a new face to the channel. Not that I filed the lawsuits, but we've gone over them. In Quebec, they sued for the curfew last year, claimed it was a constitutional violation on an injunctive basis, so different criteria, presumption of validity, yada, yada, yada. The court said no. They sued on the face masks. For kids, not for adults, the elderly, long-term. They sued for kids. The court said no. However minimal the risk is there. They sued federally on the quarantine hotels. Court said no. Those are fine too. They sued... what else did they sue for? Everything. The one they haven't sued for yet is the vaccine for air travel and train travel. But don't expect them to overturn that either. The judicial branch has failed. It is a trifecta of incestuous government figures, all looking to bonify their power. I don't even know if that's a real word. You got the government electing their medical appointees who give them advice. It goes to the courts. The courts say, well, the experts said so. So who am I to say this to the people who elected them, appointed them? It's a circle fest of judicial executive overreach, and it's gotten to us to where we are. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. I saw a red super chat here. Let's just do a couple more. Now, we have a good menu tonight. Kim Potter. No, not Kim Potter.
Kim Potter juror talked, explained just how scary juries can be, particularly in the Twin Cities right now.
We got the Kim Potter, Ghislaine Maxwell. We've
got she's about to Epstein herself pretty soon.
It will be a sick reality if we get there, but we'll get there. Tom, if we can tweet out, I don't public shame people who say no or who don't respond, and I also don't grovel or beg. But my goodness, would Tom McDonald be the gift of a millennia for me? Okay, now hold on a second. Where was that? There was this one right here. Boom. Cass Arthur says, all men recognize the right of revolution. That is the right to refuse allegiance to and to resist the government when its tyranny or its efficiency are great and undeniable. Henry David Thoreau. Beautiful and well put. All right. But Robert, I guess, while we're on the subject of the judicial branch failing in Canada and allowing this insane tyranny to flourish, you want to give us the update on these vaccination lawsuits, the mandates lawsuits in the United States, because there were some big decisions.
Yeah, so there were two decisions that came down on the Head Start mandate, one in Texas and then one today in Louisiana. The Louisiana opinion I put up at our board so people can read it for themselves and highlighted it so you don't have to read all of it. You can read some of the best parts. It has some great rhetorical statements in it. That's at vivabarneslaw.locals.com board. And so you can, but it's by the judge who keeps, is the judge who also struck down, I believe, the Medicare mandate, and maybe the same judge who also was one of the judges who early on struck down an attempt at a educational vaccine mandate. So the made a lot of good points. So it was a very robust ruling, and his ruling was for 24 states concerning the Head Start mandate. So about half the country now, the Head Start mandate is already DOA. And the basis, it's extraordinary. And what judges are making some good points, which is refreshing to see, because their point is that if the federal government has the power under the guise of a procurement standard or performance standard or workplace standard, can impose conditions on what your private medical treatment can be, then there's no limitations. And we essentially no longer have government by three branches of government. We have government by the executive branches, edicts and decrees, like the royal governors of old. And so we're seeing some good language on that record. So that was a very good ruling. And really what it does is it pushes to a culmination the two big ones that will be heard this week at the United States Supreme Court on the 7th of January. Oral arguments will be heard on the Medicare mandate and the OSHA mandate. A lot of amicus briefing has already been done on it. There's literally hundreds of briefs that have been filed in one way, shape, or form.
Robert, you could explain who are the amici in these cases? Are they're on both sides of the debate?
Yeah, they are. Sadly, the AFL-CIO has become a pitiful shell of itself, while it's failed its workers for the last half century by aligning itself to the Democratic Party with no limitations on it, in such a way that the Democratic Party has effectively gutted their private sector union base by shipping the union jobs offshore, particularly to China, with the World Trade Organization, but also NAFTA, all passed by Democratic presidents, pushed through by Democratic presidents. Barack Obama promised to reverse them. He didn't. He ended up expanding similar trade deals with Colombia and elsewhere that continued to Korea and whatnot to expand the problem rather than limit it. And the only guy who actually kept his word on trade policy was Donald Trump. who did, in fact, try to reverse parts of NAFTA. He did, and tried to reverse parts of what was happening with China and partially succeeded. But the AFL-CIO is actually writing briefs in favor of mandates on their own workers against what their workers, I'm sure, would vote for privately if they were given the option. And so it's a sad shell of itself. And it's because the professional class as a class has taken over even the positions of power within union management. So union management doesn't represent the blue-collar worker anymore. It represents the professional class prejudices. I experienced this firsthand as a young law student at the University of Wisconsin, where I represented the Wisconsin law students in a graduate student strike. And I got to see these other so-called union leaders explain to me that their goal was to serve a bunch of constituencies who weren't part of the union and didn't care to be part of the union. And they explained that their goal was to help educate their own members as to what was good for them. This is the mindset throughout. But on the good side, most of the amici briefs, these are friend of the court briefs written by people who are not parties to the case, have been written in opposition to the Biden vaccine mandates by a wide range of groups in private society. To joining the states, who are the lead challenge to both of these Medicare mandates and the Biden OSHA mandate. And so we'll see. Now they're also bringing the federal contractor mandate has already been enjoined. Now the Head Start mandate has been enjoined in half the country. The federal employee mandate has not yet been enjoined, but there will be implications for all 5 of those mandates by what the U.S. Supreme Court does this week. And you'll get a good clue. I believe the oral arguments are going to be available by audio. The U.S. Supreme Court, like all other federal courts, still refuses to allow video evidence inside the courtroom, which I think is deeply problematic. And in fact, I think it's unconstitutional. It's depriving people of open access to the courts with the modern technology that we easily have available to us. And it's foreign to the whole history of public trials, which is that used to be literally outdoors. It wasn't even indoors. So everyone could come and see and watch, and that was the point. Used to be the whole community in some places was the jury. So that's similar to what the elder tribal system kind of still is. It's the elders that preside, but in many Native American tribes, in my view, they have a better system of justice than we do in many contexts. But we'll see. So the U.S. Supreme, by the nature of the questions, generally speaking, which side gets more questions tells you which side is going to lose. That may seem counterintuitive, but they actually usually ask fewer questions of the side they want to win. And Justice Thomas has been much more vocal of late. He used to never ask any questions. He's asking questions in almost a lot of the more recent hot topic issues, some that we'll be getting to later on the issue of whether innocent people should stay locked up in prison because the state says so, as the Arizona Attorney General is propounding to the U.S. Supreme Court. But we should know by the nature of the questions where certain justices are going, and the assumption is that Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, by their prior comments, are going to say that the Biden administration does not have this power to issue vaccine mandates, whether it's OSHA, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Head Start, whether it's federal contractors. Calling these things performance standards, administrative standards, financial standards, procurement standards is ludicrous. It's just ludicrous. It shows how dangerous it is. Because if they could win on these, it's not just vaccine mandates that will be at issue. The federal government now will be able to declare anything they want, anytime they want. They'll just call it a performance standard. They'll just call it an administrative standard, a procurement standard. Climate change politics will be enforced by federal edict, executive department edict, if this doesn't win. So everybody should be paying attention, whatever they think about vaccines, because this is about the power of the federal government to circumvent the executive branch, to circumvent the other branches of government entirely.
Is the idea of framing it as a performance, whatever the terms were, is that an idea to circumvent the weak basis in science, or is that a way to circumvent so that it falls within the ambit of the laws that they are invoking to enforce this?
Both, because the other thing that stands out, if you read the cases, and one reason why I put them up at the best versions of these cases at the board, at the vivabarneslaw.locals.com board, is so people can see for themselves what evidence is cited. And once again, what is typical. Now, this was different than what happened in an Oklahoma case, but for the most part, the government has completely failed to present any evidence in support of its position. So part of it is that they're circumventing the notice and comment. This is about the executive branch being able to use emergency powers to unilaterally impose the widest range of obligations on people without going through the legislative process, without going through the judicial process, and without going through the democratizing aspect of their own executive branch process. The Administrative Procedures Act was supposed to make sure there was citizen participation and citizen discussion and citizen input into executive branch actions, and they completely circumvented that as well under emergency exception language. They didn't follow notice and comment. They didn't allow citizen petitions. They didn't address the right to petition government. That's the fifth right that the Justice Barrett forgot about in her Senate confirmation hearings. That was not the most rewarding sign of a future great justice, though apparently our dear ex-president is still celebrating that choice, but that's another story for another day. But this is big because it's not just about the power of the federal government to issue vaccine mandates and what happens with vaccine mandates downstream, that a lot of people legally, politically, financially, economically are going to follow this. A lot of big corporations, if they see these mandates fall aside, they're not going to argue with their employees. A good number of them will. So that's part one. And then part two is it's about the executive branch being able, in the latest decision by the federal court that enjoined the Head Start mandate in 24 states, said the very idea of the separation of powers is at stake. He quoted Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine in his decision. It's like, this is about whether we have a functional democracy or a de facto monarchy. Maybe he was watching Viva's rants about the dear Quebecois dictator. But it had a lot of that language in it, and he's right. That judge is absolutely right. And that's a credit to Trump. That was a Trump appointee. His district court appointees have been much better often than his appellate Supreme Court appointees have turned out to be. This is about the power. Do we have a tripartite method of government or not? Is there an emergency exception to our entire functional structure of government or not? So it's not just the vaccines that are at issue. It's the future of American government and constitutional government that's at issue. And that's why winning this is massive. And I hope we do. I believe we will. But people are really going to be looking at the tea leaves as to the assumption is the three Democrats will vote to uphold Biden's mandates, that Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas will vote to strike the mandates. And so it's where is Roberts? Where is Barrett? Where is Kavanaugh? Two of the three being Trump appointees. I'm still banking that all three of them actually end up striking down Biden's mandates, though for different reasons. I think Kavanaugh for reasons of federalism, Roberts for reasons of the Commerce Clause, not wanting it to be expanded in this manner, and Barrett because there's just way too much pressure from too many of her conservative colleagues on the bench. That basically it's something like 20-2 conservative judges have said that these mandates are not constitutional, are not statutorily authorized, are not legal. And on many grounds, the failure to go through notice and comment, the failure to allow for citizen petitions, the failure that the law just doesn't authorize this, period, and serious doubts about whether Congress could authorize this. A great opinion would say the federal government has no power of vaccine mandates, period. But at a minimum, if there is any such power that's possibly there, it has to go through the legislative process and the adjudicatory process after that, with the executive branch simply in the role of enforcement, not the role of legislative and adjudicative branch altogether.
And it's sort of like what's going on in Canada, in that we have this constitution which protects us, and it says the laws, your rights can't be violated but for a law that is specifically passed to violate them. But none of this has even gone through a law at the least in the states. Maybe it's gone through more of a process, but still nothing of the process itself.
Yeah, they've completely gutted it. I mean, even the limits on the executive branch have been completely ignored. I mean, simple notice and comment. I mean, well, why is it they couldn't go through notice and comment? We're almost 2 years into this pandemic. They couldn't go through.
Robert, if they're going to pull a Legault, they don't want the people being exposed to misinformation. So don't give them any. Just trust us. We know what we're doing.
You'll have congresswomen like Marjorie Taylor Greene and prominent doctors like Robert Malone suddenly kicked off of Twitter for so-called COVID misinformation, which is extraordinary. I mean, I think both of them have libel claims potentially available to them. It's interesting. I mean, they suspended Dr. Robert Malone, the inventor of mRNA technology, which is the basis of these experimental gene therapy drugs that are, in my view, mislabeled as vaccines. They had to redefine the word vaccine to fit them in. They didn't fit the definition of vaccine.
So Robert, nobody thinks we're crazy. When did they redefine what a vaccine meant? Most recently,
really, twice, but most recently, right before and right at the time they're announcing these vaccines. So, because historically, vaccine was that you give, is that it's sterilizing, inoculating against the disease. This doesn't do that by the admission of the CDC and the FDA and the World Health Organization. So that's not in controversy, unless you write for the New Yorker or the AP, then maybe you don't know it. But to the rest of the world that actually follows this is not in question. I mean, you can just track in Denmark. And the Omicron variant actually had a higher infection rate, according to recent studies, of the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. So, it's just not there's still debate about whether it may act as an effective therapy. Does it reduce the risk of hospitalization? Does it reduce the risk of death? In truth, there's conflicting studies available on that. Malone got into trouble simply for quoting Pfizer's own clinical study and just pointed out that according to their own data had more people suffering more severe harm that were vaccinated than unvaccinated. That's all. That was what their own clinical. He goes, you can argue causation. You can argue, maybe there's an explanation that's independent of the vaccine's efficacy. But his point is that historically, when that happens, we don't approve the drug for that purpose. Well, but yet we have here.
Here's another thing. Let me just bring this one up so I don't forget it before it goes. Mr. Barnes, are you representing any law enforcement officers or firefighters in Cali under duress due to losing their jobs due to the vaccine mandates?
I'm looking at that. There's over 200 individuals, 200 different employers that have requested I represent them in suits. So realistically speaking, I've taken on Tyson Foods. It was the first one out of the gate. And we're looking at how many others we can pick up. I'm in discussions with the Unity Project to figure out how we can coordinate legal strategies. A more effective path may be if there's a central storing house of legal research and writing, and a lot of other lawyers take up some of what you could call the grunt work. And some of us that are deeply in the weeds on this provide sort of the overarching coordinating strategy. The strategio role in the old Greek government style might be the most efficacious mechanism, because realistically, I can't take on it's literally thousands of people that have requested. It would be over 200 employers being sued. I'm already going to be suing Tyson in about a half dozen states. Tyson Foods, of course, after begging to go to federal court on the grounds that they are a federal agent, moved to dismiss on the grounds that no, they didn't really mean they were a federal agent. That they're a federal agent for purposes of federal removal, so they can dodge the accountability of a local elected Tennessee state court judge, but they're not a federal agent for purposes of federal liability. And they're figuring, hey, if it works for Big Pharma, maybe it can work for Tyson Foods. So so we'll see. Tyson Foods has been one of the most vicious companies in this respect. Well, firing people who had legitimate religious exceptions, who had been working for over 20 years, loyal to their company. So if for people out there wanting to know what they can do constructively, I would skip by Tyson Foods for a while, maybe skip it altogether. And Purdue Chicken, on the other hand, has not fired anyone who had. In fact, I had conversations with the widow of the founder of Purdue Chicken, and we may have some other developments on that front coming forward as well. But there are firemen and cops that have sued. There have been successes also. A variety of school districts in California tried to jump the gun and tried to issue vaccine mandates for young students. They all lost in court, even in California courts. And the reason they lost wasn't on the substantive issue of vaccine mandates, but that under state law in California, they have to go through the state process. They can't do it unilaterally at the city and county level. But that was still an important win. Good lawsuits brought by a lot of smart people. The ABC soap opera actor that my sisters used to watch a lot when we were young, they were always watching General Hospital. The soap opera is still on the air. Bobby Kennedy has brought suit on his behalf. And then, of course, Children's Health Defense is looking at how we can sue for the emergency use authorization being illegal for children, and also looking at the potential. Bobby Kennedy's looking at whether or not he needs to bring legal action for some of the libel that's taken place towards him because of the success of his extraordinary book about Mr. Fauci, that has Mr. Fauci crying and whining on his New Year's Eve party. So we'll see how all that goes. But and then the last update is a very, very old judge that was a George W. Bush appointee in Oklahoma said that the Oklahoma National Guard can have a vaccine mandate forced down their throat by the Defense Department, despite the objections of the Oklahoma National Guard itself and the Oklahoma governor and the Oklahoma Attorney General. You knew that how the decision was going to go. You could probably guess it just by how old the judge was. I mean, what you have people who are susceptible to COVID issuing rulings on people who are not susceptible to COVID. And, you get these really old judges who are the only ones really vulnerable to potentially to COVID risk, demanding that 3-year-olds and 8-year-olds and everyone else in between, including people who volunteer to defend their country in the National Guard, get a vaccine they neither want nor need. In their own opinions of their own medical treatment. And he refused to recognize it. Now that's going to go up on appeal. But you knew how he was going to rule, because it was all about, here's one of the dumbest analogies that I've seen that the media started with. More people have died from COVID than have died in all the wars America fought. Well, since those wars were not fought on American soil, the more relevant standard is how many soldiers have died from COVID-19 versus how many soldiers have died from war and conflict. And there, the number, of course, is pales. But the judges don't cite that because they know that would make a mockery of their rulings. But you have judges that are clearly terrified of COVID, saying governments can do whatever they want and ignoring their own constitutional obligations and the constitutional structure to get there.
Those analogies drive me nuts because they're stupid, disingenuous, dishonest, or all three. Where Brian Stetler of CNN at one point says, "Oh, we had another 9/11 of COVIDs this week," or this. I don't remember what it was. And it's like, first of all, if you want to do that, 2 9/11s of just daily death occur in the United States every day. If you want to just put things in perspective, like death is a thing; it occurs all the time. To take hyperbolic comparisons, which are causally unrelated, temporally unrelated, it's not just irrelevant, it's overtly, deliberately misleading and dishonest. And those analogies, they're just stupid. And going back to my opening rant, once you know what they have, at least on one occasion, included in those deaths, you might want to ask another question about all the other ones. I've been looking into the excess deaths for 2021, 2020, because that should be the only statistic that actually is the baseline. And when they break down excess deaths when they break it down between COVID-related excess deaths and non-COVID-related excess deaths, you should start asking yourself some questions. But one question, going back
especially, how is it excess deaths went up in many of the places that got the most vaccines compared to the year when no one was vaccinated?
Robert, let's not ask that question. But the question has been asked. But we'll get there. Everything comes out in the wash, and time is a good washing machine. So this will come out. But when Biden gets on air, I don't know when it was this week, and says the COVID response or the COVID solution is a state issue now, does that not come out and sort of undermine his federal attempt to shut the virus down? Like, do any of these lawsuits invoke that as any form of an admission that it's a state issue, even coming from the president's own mouth, even if he didn't know he said it?
Well, I'm sure it'll partially come up because those kind of statements, Democrats continue to make dumb statements in the press because Trump's challenge to the January 6th subpoena for his privileged records under executive privilege, he raised the fact that a Democratic congressman went into detail about, in fact, the chairman of the committee went into great detail about his intentions of using these records to try to get Trump criminally prosecuted or to hurt him publicly in the court of public opinion politically, which is precisely what he does not have the constitutional authority to do. And so, of course, his evidence was utilized in a supplemental briefing before the U.S. Supreme Court about why they should take the case, because the D.C. Circuit has proven itself utterly unreliable in enforcing constitutional privileges if it involves a conservative cause or perceived conservative cause. So but either way, this will be, I don't always tune into oral arguments, but I will be tuning into maybe we'll even do something live.
Yep.
January 7th to tune in to listen into these oral arguments because they're so consequential, because this is about the future of vaccine mandates, but it's not just that. It's about whether the future of the tripartite mechanism of government we have will stay alive or will be dead.
But can you imagine, Robert, like, it's a legit thing. Do we have to worry about live streaming these arguments where they might say something a la Dr. Robert Malone that will get people who rebroadcast it struck from the platform? I mean, this is how nuts, Orwellian, and dystopian the future has become.
Well, when YouTube is taking down Joe Rogan's interviews, one of the biggest people who helped monetize YouTube was Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan's interview, I don't know if it was Dr. Peter McCullough or it was with Dr. Malone.
Robert Malone that got pulled
within a day or two. Malone why are they so scared of the founder of the mRNA vaccine, a man who himself has taken this vaccine, from telling people what he knows about the risks of this vaccine for different groups? Why are they so terrified of one of the most well-respected, well-regarded medical experts in the world?
Robert, the question I have is, okay, I made it as a joke, but if YouTube is taking down the discourse of certified licensed doctors, is there ever an argument like, who files this complaint? Is it quasi-legitimate, reasonable to expect it could ever be made? Is YouTube not dispensing of medical advice without a license by suppressing the discourse of licensed medical officials?
Well, there was a suit in South Carolina that's now up on appeal because it got removed from state court to federal court, where they argued that the various private employers involved were practicing medicine without a license in issuing these vaccine mandates in the first place, because they're overriding the opinion of your doctor. They're not saying if your doctor says for you to get it, then you have to get it. They're saying that you have to get it, period, even if your doctor says maybe you shouldn't. And so the other issue I'll be talking with Steve Kirsch and some other people about, also maybe connected to the Unity Project. And in fact, this Wednesday, our sidebar, we will have Chris Martinson, who's Peak Prosperity. He's done a lot of detailed deep dives into this. An extraordinarily well-educated individual who just got into this space because he saw what was coming. He's always been a very strong civil liberties advocate his whole life. He's talking about a guy with BAs and PhDs and all the rest. And so he'll be discussing some of what he's done on in terms of what he's unveiled in this process. But part of what's happening, as Steve Kirsch has been talking about others, is that doctors are routinely being threatened now. That if they do what Robert Malone does, if they do what Peter McCullough does, if they go out and broach any dissent on this opinion, on any issue related to COVID-19 in difference with the federal government or with other so-called public health authorities, then they will be under investigation and could have their license suspended. And so we have to look at potentially bringing litigation on that as well. Some of us have always been critical of licensure authority because said it's always going to end up being abused, and here we are.
I can confirm, Robert, you have been complaining about that at least for the 2 years that I have known you. Complaining, criticizing it.
Well, as my brother and I discussed on the sidebar, and if you want a great New Year's gift, you can get my brother's book, Gordon Barnes's book, How Do We Know? It's a great, fun little discussion. He has a range of characters around a range of popular topics, making philosophy accessible. But as we discussed in the sidebar with him, I've been complaining about this since I was a kid because my father was railroaded out of accounting because he didn't have a certain certification or licensure when he was a better bookkeeper and accountant and tax preparer than 90% of the so-called licensed credentialed class. When we had George Gammon on last week, there were a couple people saying, well, he's not a licensed professional financial advisor. I was like, thank God, because if he was, you'd been losing your money and everything else. It's these licensure professional class people that are the problem. And because they dominate the judiciary by definition, we're seeing what that looks like. Governance by the professional class is an inevitable, inescapable disaster. The last time they had a peak of power outside of the communists, who were dominated communist governments overwhelmingly by the professional class, not the working class. The people who most regretted the fall of the Soviet Union initially was the professional class, not the working class of Russia or of the other former Soviet countries. We're seeing, it was World War I. I mean, it was when professional class was at their peak of their power to a large degree. The so-called progressive era was often a professional class dominated era. A lot of Victorian colonialism was done in the name of the professional class and by the professional class. There are people who think they know better than everyone else because they read something in a book, but they don't understand the world as it really exists, and they're the worst people to manage and govern the rest of us, and we're seeing that in live time.
Kenneth Miller has reminded me, this is the next Mercer. We've got Viva Fro coming as soon as we get the graphic done, but we needed one that is both, more Robert than Viva. I don't want to read this. That was an echo. Doesn't matter. Forget the echo, people. Okay, I'm bringing it up. But so is like the argument of practicing medicine without a license. How does one file a complaint hypothetically without inciting people to file complaints or seek litigation? What would be the mechanism to file a complaint for someone who's practicing medicine without a license? And could there even be the argument that this is what YouTube, or at the very least the decision makers within YouTube, are doing by suppressing the speech of actual licensed doctors?
Well, yes. I mean, like what happened in that South Carolina case, that ultimately the court rejected it for its own reasons, but they've said otherwise in a lot of other cases. I mean, for example, they were going after anybody who promoted vitamin D, silver, vitamin B, vitamin C, other health, getting sun. Anybody who was promoting that at the beginning of COVID was targeted for federal criminal investigation by Bill Barr's Department of Justice. And remember, everybody, Bill Barr's father is the one who first hired Jeffrey Epstein. Just a little side point. And on the grounds, in part, that they were practicing medicine without a license, also in part that they were false advertising under FDA rules. And now, of course, we know that certain vitamin deficiencies are a strong correlation with your risk factor for COVID-19 severe consequences. So it turned out a lot of these people were the ones that were right, not Fauci and crew, once again. But it's amazing that they've applied different standards when it's their preferred people doing it. So, I mean, clearly every employer is practicing medicine without a license when they're forcing their employees to have a certain medical treatment on the grounds that they think that's what's better for them medically. They're not equipped to do that. Now I dislike licensing in general, so I'm never going to be the big patron of pushing that as a theory. but it is practically what they're doing, and it's definitely what they've accused others of doing when they don't like what their opinions were.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll see. I mean, I just find it fascinating. There is a debate, and it goes back to whoever can track the Wikipedia entries of Robert Malone's participation in mRNA. We've discussed it. I just feel the need to constantly bring up the flip side argument, which was that the Wikipedia was updated to add him as the creator of mRNA technology, where he wasn't, so they had to remove it to be truthful to the history. And this is when you literally get into casualties of war. The first casualty of war is the truth, and you never know who to. Robert, what is that? Bud Light or is that Monster?
No, this is a Dr. Pepper Cherry Zero.
Okay, I'm sorry. I swear,
which is my favorite
Bud Light
thing with cigars.
I thought it was Bud Light. My entire perspective of you is about to change. Thank goodness.
Oh yeah, God bless. But no, American generic beers are not my thing. I'll put it that way, unless it's Pabst Blue Ribbon, because that's just too American not to drink.
Well, that is iconic. Wait a minute. What about targeted litigation of the fact checkers who are presenting opinion as medical fact but practicing medicine without a license? Well,
I mean, that's really already happening. There's a bunch of suits on those grounds in different contexts. I mean, Stossel's a different context that he has his. Candace Owens has hers. Bobby Kennedy and Children's Health Defense have sued Facebook on these grounds. So all of it is there, but that may be another angle as well.